It's really exciting to advocate for something you truly believe in, which is why I'm so thrilled that Bandwidth Conversations is being sponsored by Clearer this year. Clearer has genuinely revitalized my skin. This isn't another cream on the shelf. Clearer is bespoke, evidence-based skincare created by consultant dermatologist Dr. Emma Craythorne, one of the leaders in her field. Emma's founding product, the Clearer Special, is a personalized night treatment that brings together multiple advanced actives, many of which you can't get over the counter, into one luxurious cream. And here's the thing. I've tried countless products over the years, all promising miracles. None worked. Then I started using Clearer, and within a month, friends were saying, "What have you done? Your skin looks amazing." And even I was doing double takes in the mirror. I looked fresher, younger, and glowing. And it's not just me saying this. Vogue, Elle, and Cosmopolitan all rave about Clearer. So if you want to find out more, head to clearer.skin. That's Klira.skin. If you want to find out more about Clearer founder, Dr. Emma Craythorne, listen to my podcast with her, as her story is fascinating and her credentials are mind-blowingly impressive. Plus, Bandwidth Conversations listeners get 20% off the Clearer Special for the first 3 months on quarterly and annual plans. Just use the code bandwidth20. It is a game changer. Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of creatives and rock stars of life. My guest today needs no introduction. Widely regarded as Britain's best-known impressionist, satirist and comedian, he is also a translator of operas, a columnist, a writer, presenter, ballroom dancer and actor, and he's hiding his head in his hands at the moment. He has brought to life everyone from Billy Connolly to Nelson Mandela, Boris Johnson to Ian Mckellen. In addition, he actively supports a great number of good causes, one being the UK ADHD Partnership, of which he is patron. He spent a lifetime perfecting the art of becoming other people. But who is he? I'm looking forward to finding out. It is a real treat to be speaking today to the master of mimicry, a true national treasure,
No.
Rory Bremner.
Trying to keep a straight face during it. From Billy Connolly to Nelson Mandela. What was the other one? From Bill Clinton?
No, it was,
Boris Johnson.
oh my gosh, Boris Johnson.
Yeah, no, we yes, indeed, also Boris Johnson. Honestly, I mean, how could, it's part of my job to make them look more ridiculous than they are, but I saw Boris on television. I mean, there's a man who brushes his hair with a balloon, isn't it? I mean, he just...
Yes, he does.
It's all that. And yes, and various other people. But yeah, big characters, that's what you always look for as an impressionist. Thank you for the introduction. I try to keep a straight face.
Well, you have done all of these things.
Ballroom dancing was very blink and you'd have missed that.
I watched you last night, actually, on a little clip. And I thought you did brilliantly.
Well, that's very sweet of you. But I think I lasted on Strictly slightly less time than Liz Truss did in Number 10.
You look good to me. But you grew up in Morningdale, Edinburgh.
Morningside, yeah. It's got a bit of a reputation, but Morningside. They used to say, what's a creche? There's a car accident in Morningside. What about rates? We don't have rates, we have mace. So it's a posh part of Edinburgh, kind of like Merchiston area. A place near Holy Corner, which had 3 churches, that's hence Holy Corner. And yes, it was an Edinburgh childhood. It's a lovely place to be because the sea isn't far away and you've got beautiful hills. It's on 7 hills like Rome. And yeah, it's a lovely place to have a childhood.
And what was life like in the Bremner household?
It was very interesting. Our record collection, it wasn't sort of like Pink Floyd and Queen and Led Zepp. It was like Dame Edna Everage and Flanders and Swan.
Oh, nice.
And so, yeah, it was kind of those comedy records and wordplay record. Danny Kaye was another great favourite. So I grew up, my brother was 5 years older than I was. So it meant we missed each other at school because obviously, you go to school for 5 years and then he moved on to Wellington when I went to Clifton Hall. And so in a sense, I only saw him from aged 8, I think, until I was whatever it was, 19. I only saw him in the holidays. We used to do voices together and we talk about teachers because obviously that was one of the things when you're at school and you're a class clown. You mentioned the ADHD bit. Part of that is you become a class clown. My dad was the army background. He was a major. That was the highlight of his life, actually, was World War II. And then he became an appeals secretary for Cancer Research Campaign until he got cancer himself and he died when I was 18. Mum was very Christian, very kind. She was very sweet. Edinburgh's got 2 sides to it, got a duality to it. It's got the generous where ladies take tea, and then there's train spotting, which is a very different kind, which doesn't mean actually looking for trains, but it means having a head down a lavatory, fishing out drugs.
Oh, right. Okay.
Well, that was the train spotting. But Edinburgh is very famously, I mean, there was the Deacon Brodie, who is the sort of famous, he was a highwayman by night and he was a magistrate by day, or a respectable citizen by day. Edinburgh has an old town and a new town. And in fact, Robert Louis Stevenson, who's Edinburgh's most famous writer, he captured that duality in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a fascinating city, and our childhood was a middle class prep school childhood. Dad wasn't around that much. He preferred to be at his club in the evenings. So he wasn't around a huge amount. My brother and I think sense of humour was important. And Dad and I, we loved sport, and he loved comedy on television. So that must have played a role. He loved Dave Allen and It Ain't Half Hot, Mum, and stuff like that, because that was his thing from being in the army years ago. So yeah, it was an uneventful childhood.
Well, that's probably quite a good thing.
Yes.
Anyway, I taught maths at Eton, and well, that's not my claim to fame. My claim to fame is that I was a beak.
What's a female beak?
A beak.
A beak, yes, it's still a beak.
I think it's still a beak.
You didn't teach Boris, did you?
I did not teach.
Was he there?
He was there, but not at the same time as me. No, I didn't teach him, but I did teach Tom Hiddleston and Eddie Redmayne. That's my claim to fame.
Did you?
And Tom, I understand, spent his life doing sketches, singing, dancing, performing. So driving his family mad. And so they always knew he was going to end up on stage. Was that you?
Yes, to some extent. My mum called me scatty or sort of flibbity-gibbet. And I remember a letter from a friend talking about Rory's irrepressible showmanship. Which was a kind of, I think it was used as a stick to beat me with, in a way. I was a little bit show-offy. But you see, now I realise, without over-diagnosing, which we'll come back to, it was clearly the ADHD part of me, but I see that as a plus. In a sense, it's my best friend and my worst enemy. I've talked about this before. In that worst enemy, in that you are impetuous and irrepressible, you do make connections very quickly, and you are creative, and you do have a tremendous energy. As a child, yes, I had too much energy. I realised that actually doing voices was the best way through, because suddenly people laughed when I did voices. I thought, oh, this is good. My worst moment at school, and I probably told people about this too many times, was the rugby pitches were frozen, so we played a football tournament. And I remember I was so overexcited that I tackled our own centre forward because I wanted a shot at goal.
So you wanted to get him out of the way?
I pushed him out of the way, and then, of course, I missed the goal by about 20 feet. And I look back at that, and that is a bit, right, okay, that's probably impetuous. And that was probably the ADHD kicking in. But I remember my last school report, there was a teacher who said that Rory was very keen to show the rest of the class how little he knows. Ouch.
That's a bit harsh.
Yeah. Yes. Then the last report I had, one of the last reports at Wellington, it was Rory who could have a successful career in cabaret if all else fails. And I went back to the prep school after 50 years, and they said, would you do a prize giving? And I went up there, and I was in Edinburgh the night before. And I thought, yeah, I'll sort of busk this. And then I thought, no, hang on, this is a prize giving. You've got to think about something. And so I had an evening of the equivalent of tossing and turning. I had a laptop, and I had a notebook, and I had a piece of paper, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted to write it on a laptop or on a notebook, whether I wanted to busk it, whether I wanted to make notes. And I was just all over the place. I said, just go to bed and wake up. And in the morning, that report came back to me, Rory, who could have a successful career in cabaret if all else fails. So I told that story, and I said, this is what failure looks like. This is what failure looks like. And I kind of asked about if there were other people who related to that kind of irrepressibility and that impetuosity. And of course, I saw some children light up.
And there would have been a lot of them.
I talked to them about football or rugby teams. I said, who are the big, tall, strong ones? And you play in the scrum. And who are the small ones who are really fast? You'll be out in the 3/4. And I said, there's a place for everybody. And it's a question of finding your place. So I over-talked. Just don't beat yourself up. Be who you are. Although we can come back to that later on, because being yourself is not necessarily the greatest asset of an impressionist, because you spend so much time being other people. And I was told once in a Royal Variety show, I was pacing around nervously backstage, going, getting nervous. And somebody came up and said, are you nervous? I said, yeah, I'm very nervous. And they said, just don't worry, just go out there and be yourself. And I thought, well, you know I'm an impressionist, so that's not going to work.
When you were at school, were you the boy being sent out?
Funnily enough, just one of those weird quirks of fate, because my name began with B, Bremner, I was at the front of the class. Although they did shuffle them sometimes, and put them at the back, but I was at the front of the class. I was right under the teacher's nose. And so my mission, instead of distracting the people at the back of the class, was impressing the teacher at the front of the class. So,
okay, so that was good.
If my name had been Zimmerman or something like that, then things could have been very different.
I've had a few guests on the show who went to boarding school and they had horrific experiences. How was your boarding school experience?
I'd say by and large okay, but the 70s at Wellington, it was quite a Spartan place. A lot of people ended up at Sandhurst. It's weird, it's so long ago, I can almost see it in black and white. I enjoyed games, that was the thing. I did enjoy rugby, I enjoyed cricket, I enjoyed hockey. I think if I hadn't enjoyed sport, I don't know quite what would have happened, because There was a premium put on sport. And of course, I found theatre. So I did plays. And the last year, I did my first impression, which we had a French teacher called Derek Swift, and he spoke like this. He had a Northern Sydney Bradford accent, and he'd talk about the children. He'd say, "Oi, you, infant." He was the one, I think he was the teacher who suggested that we shouldn't have a dining hall, we should have a trough. The manners were so bad. But he absolutely got me. I was really lucky. There was about 6 or 8 of us. And he said the other day, it was like the history boys. He said there were 2 cohorts, which in his lifetime of teaching, he looked back and thought that was a very special year. And I was really lucky to be part of that year. So they kind of gave me a toe. He was amazing. He had a blackboard and he'd just be writing. We were sort of 13 or 14 and he'd say, as you'll remember from your Serbo-Croat. And he'd write something in Russian, Cyrillic or in Serbo-Croat or this, that. And he taught us how all these words come together, like the word for mother, German Mutter, French mère, Spanish mujer, Russian mать. Oh, God, it's the same word because mother and mutter are the same. And then I remember, I can hear it in his voice, the intervocalic consonant, which is the consonant between 2 vowels. So if you take the mutter, take the T out of it, it becomes mujer, which is mujer.
Yes.
And so you go, oh, so all these languages fit together. So the next thing we knew, he was teaching us Russian in his spare time and in our spare time. And we did Russian O-level. 6 of us did Russian O-level.
Wow.
Again, I was lucky. He was a remarkable teacher.
Did you take him off when you were doing impressions?
I did. It became the first impression that I did publicly. So I borrowed a pair of trousers that looked like his and suede shoes and a duffel coat. He was always in a duffel coat. He used to have a film club. Actually, not a film club. The school would have a film, interesting films as well, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or whatever. And he would introduce it. He'd say, right, now this is a film by Fellini. It's going to last about an hour and a half and then there will be 3 real changes. And so I just did one of his speeches like that. And that was when I was just getting towards the end. I was 17, 18. And it was starting to be a big part of me was, I can make people laugh. And Rowan Atkinson was just starting out at that time. So I would do the headmaster routine where he's Ainsley, Babcock, Bland, Ellsworth, Beast, Major, all those. And also I came from Edinburgh, remember? And so Edinburgh, the festival.
Yes.
And so every August, the circus would come to town. And in those years, again, luck, fate. We're talking 79, 80, 81. So when I was 18, 19, 20. So in my absolutely impressionable years. And who was doing show? Rowan Atkinson was doing the Edinburgh Festival in 78, 79, around about that time. Then we get to sort of 80, 81. And the Cambridge Footlights, which was a big city.
Yes,
they always used to
huge.
do the review. And that year, 80, 81, it was Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Emma Thompson, and Tony Slattery. I was going on to university. Again, fate. I was offered St Andrews or Bristol, perhaps, and I went for London. And just at that time, the London cabaret circuit was beginning. The pub theatres were turning from pub theatres to being comedy venues. You would do 3 shows in an evening. And, you'd start off at the Finborough Arms in Earl's Court in a little room above a pub doing stand-up. And then you jump on the tube, go up to Hemmingford Arms, which is the end of the Piccadilly line up in Islington somewhere. And another room of people waiting. And then you go back down to Jongleurs, south of the river where we are now, south to Battersea, and finish off the evening there. So you'd be doing, 3 little 20-minute sets. But that was growing up all over London. And of course, Stanley Baxter, who was tremendous. People don't know so much in the south, but he was like, we had Mike Yarwood, of course.
Yes.
Everyone remember Mike Yarwood, and he'd do just Robin Day impressions, all those sort of things. And that's how it sounded. And he did, and Bob Bunkhouse. And I remember, he used to do this Bob. Yeah, and David Attenborough. So I was brought up doing that. But also in Scotland, Stanley Baxter was kind of a mixture between Mike Yarwood and Danny LaRue in a way. And he would dress up. He had the most wonderful legs, and he did these amazing variety numbers. And he was a brilliant impressionist. He would be doing more sort of Noel Coward or film impressions. Probably the closest we got to that was French and Saunders when they used to do their film parodies, and Stanley Baxter used to do that. And eventually the production values were so high they couldn't afford him anymore. But he died a year or 2 ago, just last year at Christmas time. And watching him in pantomime at the King's Theatre in Edinburgh, I thought, I want to be doing that. So again, and the reason I mentioned that was luck. So Edinburgh, bright group of kids, great teacher back at Wellington, Edinburgh festivals, cabaret circuit beginning, happened to be at London University, lectures in the day, stand-up comedy in the evening.
Rory, doing it to your schoolmates, which is one thing, and making them laugh, and then standing up in front of a bunch of strangers with a prepared set.
Progress.
Scary.
Well, yeah. Well, I suppose, you got over the nerves in the sense that you liked performing anyway. But actually, I have to thank my brother for this, because he was, I mentioned the Finborough Arms. I think he went to see it, and then they said, we got an open mic night. And he said, my brother does impressions. And so he said, come along and do that. And I used to do sports commentators. And
Brilliant at your
God
sports commentators.
knows if I had to start again, where would I start? But luckily I had a few, I had Peter O'Sullivan, who was the horse racing commentator. And I still do him now. He's my closing of the act now. Because I do a Labour government novice stakes for complete novices, run over 5 years with the going bad to worse. And the what from first to show is Rachel Reeves in the blinker straight out of the stalls with winter fuel payments and employers' national insurance and farmers' IHT. And it's interesting because my audience now who come to the live shows tend to be of a certain age, 50s or 60s, and they can remember.
So we're going to know. We know everybody.
So you remember those. And interesting now, although I do Donald Trump, it's very, very topical. And, people like that. I bring so much peace to the world, Kate, so much peace to the world. In fact, more than Jesus Christ, in fact. And people often compare us. They say, when they see me, they say, Jesus Christ. So, there's some topical stuff. And we've now got, last night I was writing stuff about Prince Andrew. And you're trying to keep up with events. And I was thinking, all this fuss about him being eighth in line. And you think, eighth?
That's a lot of disaster has to happen.
You'd have to have a drone strike on Sandringham Church on a Christmas day.
Yes.
And then they get Harry. If you're eighth in line in the post office, that's the point where you go,
you wouldn't worry.
No, you go and you come back later. Because there's some sort of old lady in front of you. Actually, there was an old lady in front. Actually, when you think about it, I mustn't talk about my mother, Her Majesty. But so that was sort of stuff writing last night. But I can't remember where we were going in the question.
It was about just that transitioning from then to standing up on stage in front of strangers. So I guess it just was a natural thing.
Well, a lot of things, again, the person who ran the Finborough Arms was the booker, was a remarkable woman called Nika Burns. And Nika, then she took over the Donmar Warehouse.
Oh, yes.
And at the Donmar Warehouse in the 80s, she started this thing late in life. So after their evening thing, they would have a little cabaret thing. And often it was Bertice Redding, who was a wonderful soul jazz singer. And they had Lon Sasson and stuff. So they had a sort of jazz, but also they had a bit of stand-up comedy. And Nika got me to do that, and she got my equity card. And Nika is now queen of the West End. She manages a lot of theatres. I mean, she is the queen of the West End of Shaftesbury Avenue. But again, I was kind of her pet, as it were. She sort of spotted me and booked me. And then the show started to grow, and then people used to come and see for chat shows like Terry Wogan's chat show or Russell Harty's chat show, and you started to get...
Was it Russell Harty that found... Did he kind of find you? Was that not really true?
No, it was Russell Harty a little bit too. He kind of sort of slightly took me under his wing. He was actually, I was going, that's interesting. He sounds like Derek Swift there, doesn't he?
But I'm trying not to laugh because I don't want anyone to go over the top of your...
It's okay.
Over the top of your accent.
No, you can laugh. Actually, it was more Terry Wogan. I was doing my show at King's College London. We did a sort of review, and somebody came along who was at Queen Mary's College. No, it was in Kensington. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, he came along and he saw me and and he recruited me for the London University Drama Society's review in Edinburgh, which we did in 1981. So that was 81. And then in 83, I came back because I spent a year in Paris. And we put a review on in Paris called You Are Eiffel, But I Like You.
It's such a great title.
Oh my God, how embarrassing. These titles, always good with titles. It's 1983, 84, and I'm leaving university. I'm doing stand-up in the evening, and I'm starting to get these 25-minute stand-up routines together. Go to Edinburgh in 84, and it was three of us. It was me, Mark Steele. He's still going. He's such a good comedian. He does Mark Steele's in town. He does this wonderful show where he goes to a different town every week. He kind of like works it up, and he makes the whole town laugh at themselves. And so it's Mark and Jenny Eclair. Me and Mark and Jenny Eclair. We did our Edinburgh show, and sure enough, the BBC researchers or producers came along because they were recording a show. They cut off at the fringe, as they called it, and the highlights of the fringe. They said, would you do the links? And they put me together with a writer called John Langdon, and he wrote some links for me, and I linked that. And John became my writer for the next 30 years until he died about 5 years ago. Yeah, he was by my side for 30 years. Radio 2, I think it was, ran the show, and Terry Wogan was on Radio 2. He said, here's a chap who does impressions that nobody else does. All these different characters that I've never heard before. And so he kind of promoted it. And when he came to do his live shows on his 3 times a week on BBC, I did the first of those. And it was me, Elton John, and Tina Turner. And oh my Lord, can you imagine how frightening that was? And they gave me a huge amount of time. I mean, that must have had 6 or 7 minutes, which is an eternity. And that was where it took off. I can't believe it. I feel like I'm up a mountain now and I'm going to fall off. I look down and think, how did I get up here? And thank God that I did. Get emotional about it now.
That wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been really good at it, which you are.
I did a show last night in Henley. I've been very, very lucky because only about 2 or 3 years ago, I did the first of being on a comedy bill again. And I didn't know because I normally did corporate shows after dinners and award ceremonies and stuff like that under the radar because people don't know about them, but you're doing the Grosvenor House Hotel or hotels all around the country, big banqueting suites and award ceremonies and stuff like that. And that was the bread and butter and tour shows. But between those is the comedy clubs and the comedy evenings. And they asked me to do it about 3 years ago, Warwick Castle. And I was on a bill again. So there were 2 or 3 other comedians and, I see. And suddenly, instead of having to do like 40 minutes or an hour, you just do 20, 25 minutes. And I was back to where it started. And I started to do that. And I worked up to get a tour show together last year. And it blends the topical stuff. I talked about Trump. I talked about, I love England. I'm a tremendous Anglophile. And I love Peter Mandelson. I'm a tremendous pedophile. So it's the topical stuff like that, the Keir Starmer and all of that. And that. But also on tour, I get somebody to interview me. And so I talk about the people that I met, like meeting Mandela or sort of encounters with Bob Geldof, who called me early in the morning and never heard so many swear words in your life. It's that effort Farage, he's taken an effing flotilla down the Thames. We're going to F him up. And I said, Bob, I'm on the school run. Can you just, anyway. So those stories. But my point was that I'm building up the act, a mixture of topical, but then I do a sort of thing where I talk about, God, do you remember we're of a certain age? I remember John Prescott. And so for 10 years, we had a deputy prime minister who looked like a National Express coach driver. Or Les Dawson. Now that is stuff I've been doing for 20 years or so. But
still
they
fresh.
but if I did an impression of Wes Streeting now, people go, oh, okay, it's Wes Streeting. But if you do John Prescott or David Blunkett or whatever,
you bring them right back to life.
You're suddenly reconnecting with an audience of a certain age. You're sort of taking them back down memory lane. So do you remember this? Do you remember that, this, that, and the other? And it's not the most satirical show I've ever done because I think the world is so dark at the moment that if I was to be satirical about Gaza or even about Trump, I mean, I'm mildly satirical about Trump, but the thing about politicians now is they're so shameless. You think, well, satire, it just kind of bounces off them. So my thing is entertaining. And my point is that doing these shows like the one I did last night, these comedy things, for the first time in my life, I am feeling a real joy. I can't tell you, just hearing people laugh as loudly and as fully and as unreservedly as they're doing now. And I'm allowing myself, sometimes when you're a comedian, or for years actually, I don't know if this is true for other comedians, but the laughter would be a kind of noise which you'd use to time your device. Oh, it's a big noise. Oh, it's a small noise. Oh, it's a big.
Yeah.
But now I kind of go, oh, they're really enjoying themselves. I'm living on my emotions at the moment. And that is like, I've just parked my car outside your house and there's a charging meter and the car is quietly charging up. And shows charge me up because that is where I'm at my most fulfilled.
Laughter is the best medicine.
Unless you've got diabetes, in which case insulin might come in quite handy. I suppose the difference is there that it's satisfying on one of it, but it doesn't feel like showing off so much as it feels like making people happy. And actually, it's too much out because it means that I'm not properly grounded in a sense. I'm too dependent on that to make me happy, but it does. Making people happy makes me happy. As a psychiatrist would say, you can blur the boundaries. If you're just about making people happy, what about you?
Well, yes, there are other examples. Tony Hancock and Peter Sellers were so talented at bringing joy to others, and they weren't able to find it so much in their own lives. Have you found that, not for you, but just as a trait in these absolute genius comedians?
Yeah, no, by and large, no, I don't have sort of long, dark moments of the soul, which they tend to. I've got good friends and I've got lots of sort of interests. I mean, I love sport. I mean, it's affected me in a way that I had 3 best friends, really good friends, some of whom, in fact, you might know or might have known of. One was Michael Ronnie Armist, who was...
Yes, I know Ronnie.
Ronnie was a South African. He was born in East London and lived in West London, East London in South Africa. I remember doing a joke at his 50th about that. It took him 10 years to go from East London to West London because that was how slowly he drove, because he did drive. I used to tease him. He drove so slowly that he was once cut up by a funeral cortege. But anyway, but there was Ronnie, and he was great. He always remembered your birthday, or he'd say, "Hi, Roy, how was the operation? I know that you had your appendix out or whatever." And he was great. And sadly, he died about 10 or 12 years ago. That's one friend. Another was Graham Cowdrey, a cricketer. He was best friend. He such a sense of humour. When I got married to Tessa, we're just waiting for her to come up the aisle, and Graham turned to me. And if you know your horse racing, Graham turned to me and said, "It's a big moment, Raw. They're going behind at Lingfield." And it was just one of, if he'd said they're under orders at Newmarket, it's the fact that they're going behind. It means they're just going to post. They're getting ready for the races at Lingfield, which is kind of like a sort of provincial racetrack. He was so wonderful. And Graham, and he died sadly about 6 or 7 years ago. And my writer that I mentioned earlier on,
Yes.
John Langdon, and he died about 5 years ago. But he was 80 and he had basically emphysema. They now call it COPD, I think, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. But because he'd smoked so many things over his life, that he said, no, I'm ready to go. But having 3 best friends, male best friends, and all of them to go, I think that has left a big hole. But we're recording this on a sunny day, and there is hope, and there are children. I've got my 2 kids, 2 girls. You've got to find the happiness.
Find the happiness, and how lovely to be able to give others happiness. From the Wogan show, you ended up with Now Something Else, BBC, which turned into the Rory Bremner show. You then moved from the BBC to Channel 4, and that was Rory Bremner, Who Else? And that turned into Bremner, Bird and Fortune. So while you were doing your show last night, I was downstairs and I watched a 2006 episode of Bremner, Bird and Fortune, and it was as fresh. You did Peter Mandelson, which was very timely.
Very much in the
did
news.
lots
Peter Mandelson, I was watching him last night, yes. No, but they asked me, they said, you're going to have to come and be interviewed. I said, well, I expect to be treated like royalty. And they did. They put me in a cell and they questioned me for 7 hours. But I've had to know, you must realise, Kate, this has cost me a lot. I've had to give up my title of Prince of Darkness. I'm no longer a working member of the Darkness royal family. It's funny, Voices come back and he's very much in that mould. But yeah, there's lots of little bits in that. Yes, Now Something Else was my first BBC show, a bit of a gang show in the sense that there's a lot of comedians off the circuit. We talked about the comedy circuit.
Yes.
And so they were recruited. We did that. It became more of a sort of me doing my impressions. Then it became Rory Bremner and Rory Bremner, Who Else? And Channel 4. We were very lucky. We had from 92 to 2010, we had about 18 years of license from Channel 4. They said, just get on and do it. And Bird and Fortune, and I changed the title from Rory Bremner, Who Else? To Bremner, Bird and Fortune, because I thought these guys are so much part of the show, they need to be in the title. It was fairness. I owed them so much. And of course, they are both dead now. So John Bird and John Fortune.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. So there's Ronnie Armis, Graham Cowdery, John Bird, John Fortune, John Langdon. And they're all gone. Maybe I'd be a little bit more, how would I say, stable? Maybe I'd be a little bit more sorted if they were still around, but it feels a little bit lonely sometimes. But we were very lucky at Channel 4. Then in 2010, they pulled the plug. That was when the coalition came in. But of course, the coalition, which we thought of as being quite benign, actually that's where the seeds were sown for Brexit, because it was felt that globalisation didn't work for a lot of people. But in the 90s and 2000s, people thought, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote that book called The End of History, where he thought we'd finally reached a point in civilization where we had these benign liberal democracies and free market capitalism, and that by and large we got there. And then you look what's happened in the last 10 years. And I say to audiences, it's fallen apart. I think it was Lenin who said, or rather it might have been Richard Madeley, who said that there are decades where nothing happens for weeks and there are weeks where decades happen. We seem to be in this incredible fast forward, which is hard to keep up with. There's just the turnover of ministers. Keir Starmer being our 6th Prime Minister in 8 years. And as I say to audiences, if you go to hospital with a head injury or dementia, what's the first thing they ask is, who's the Prime Minister? So when no wonder the hospitals are so full, because people go, oh, hang on, is it Theresa May? No, no. Everything sort of comes at you like, remember those Pearl and Dean things where stuff comes flying past you. Even on satire and stuff like that, you've got to be careful, because I think people are much more likely to take offence.
You found that?
Barry Humphries used to say, I think, and it's funny, sometimes you think that it's when you get a laugh and a gasp at the same time, that's always very satisfying, because you've gone to the edge. But all it takes is one person at the back of the audience writing something down and saying, like, even if I did my joke about, I'm an Anglophile, I'm a paedophile, it just takes, one person going to the post and say, oh, you called Donald Trump a paedophile. And say, well, no, there's a context to that. You can't judge a comic if you weren't in the audience knowing the context of that. And sometimes you think about, am I going to do that joke about, and am I prepared to die on that hill because if somebody went away and took that joke out of context? And so that's a little bit scary. But also the BBC and Channel 4, channels are now much more concerned about losing their license or about being intimidated. People judge me on Twitter. It's such a very, as Giles Brandon says, very ungracious. You know, you can put a joke out on Twitter and I will get positive, and then you get the people who come, the bots, and they pile in and say, oh, you used to be funny, or another washed up lefty comedian, oh, another lovey. Various shades of just
vicious
rudeness and stuff like that, because they're judging you on your politics. Somebody wrote to me on Twitter when I was doing Alex Salmond, and they said, don't insult me. I voted for him. Don't. And I think, I'm not insulting you. I'm holding up a politician in a different light. And satire, ridicule, lampooning, questioning, whatever it is, that's a very healthy part of democratic discourse. And you can't just shut it down because that's your political hero, because that way you will get the polarization that we have now, which is why left and right don't talk to each other. You've got to remember that two things can be true at the same time. I think maybe we should reintroduce the idea of literally to have a comedian has a license. So I'm really offended. And you actually go to your back pocket and say, look, I'm sorry, I've got a license to tell that joke. And that license means that I'm allowed to say something which might be ambiguous, which might be offensive. But, you know, you've got to remember something like Billy Connolly, and if somebody's offended, you say, well, you know where Billy Connolly's heart is. He is about bringing people together, making us laugh at the foibles, making us laugh at all this sort of thing. He is not saying, right, I'm going to go out and offend you. Judge him in that context. Or in fact, preferably don't judge him at all. Just enjoy it, relate to it. And if you don't relate to it, then maybe not for you, but don't cancel a comedian. But there are different types. If somebody is absolutely gratuitously offensive, it's difficult because, you know, when I used to in the show, and I used to do Trevor McDonald and I used to do Nelson Mandela, and I would black up for that. And Trevor McDonald was a friend, and Ainsley Harriott was another one. And they never sort of pulled me to one side and said, and because at that time, rightly or wrongly, in whatever context, my thing was to look as much like the characters that you did. So if I was Bruce Forsyth, you know, they had the big chin and the neck. And if it was Trevor McDonald, I needed to look like a black newsreader.
And I saw you last night as Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, and he had different noses and different hair.
I saw it. It had the complete integrity of purpose, and I was absolutely colourblind. It was the most natural thing. You're doing this character. You're not making fun of his skin. You're just looking like him. But I wouldn't do it now, because now it would look like I was being gratuitously offensive, because in the light of sensitivities, I had a conversation with Ainsley a while ago, actually. And I said, I just want to say, I'd be mortified if I thought for a second that you were offended when I did an impression of you on it, because you thought that I was doing something about your skin colour. And he gave me a big hug and a big smile. He said, I never did. And I thought, oh, that's lovely, because it's like when I did David Blunkett, I had the eyes moving around. And I thought, oh God, is that going to get me into trouble? But in order to do David Blunkett properly, you were doing that impression. You wanted to look like the character. And I bumped into him. He came to one of the speakers' agencies. They had a big party and David Blunkett was there, and the lift doors opened and there was Blunkett and his dog. And I thought, oh, I must help him, just guide him, essentially. And I said, hello, Mr. Blunkett, I'm Rory Bremner. He said, oh, I've got a bone to pick with you. And I thought, oh, here it comes. And he said, my people say whenever you do impressions of me, you're always looking up. So now I look down deliberately. And I thought, well, that's good. He said that as acknowledgement. But you see, even that conversation, they could take it out of this podcast. You might even consider what people would think about it. What I'm talking about is there was not a racist intention, a bone in the body of the entire company. It was just another character that you're doing.
Going back to these wonderful shows of yours, you were a mainstay of Channel 4's comedy output, and you won BAFTAs for top comedy performance. You won 3 Royal Television Society Awards and 2 British Comedy Awards.
So long ago, it feels like another person. But yeah, we had a great time. Channel 4 trusted us. They backed us. We had a great team. The team worked with us, were wonderful. We had great researchers, and we were doing programs about Iraq in real time. I remember once, because Blair and George Bush, they were due to meet at Camp David. They booked a space at the West London Shooting School because they had some log cabins and it looked similar. But then, of course, they had a heavy snowfall in the East Coast. So they brought in all this artificial snow. And then the snow in America was so bad that they cancelled Camp David altogether. And they actually came back to Washington. So we just filmed the whole thing in these log cabins with artificial snow. And just caught out. And even worse than that, because it was a shooting school, there were lots of people shooting. So literally, I had to time it around, because I knew obviously they had shotguns. So they had 2 barrels. Literally, I would actually do my lines between the shots. It would be like, sort of, we say, gosh, do you think, George, do you think we can actually, do you think we can do something about this? Pause. It just was bizarre. So that's some of the things about filming. The way we did those shows, I mean, literally on a Monday morning, I would go in and see Jeff Atkinson, my producer, and he was a writer as well. Just a lovely guy. And we would just sit opposite each other and go, right, what are we going to do this week? Because we essentially had to do 4 or 5 characters in makeup and maybe a couple more on the Thursday. I'll come back to that. Anyway, so we literally had to think, well, what are we going to write about this week? Well, George Bush and Tony Blair are meeting this week. So we've got that.
Because it's all topical, isn't it? It all has to be right to the last minute.
So we wrote the show, Jeff and I, in a day and a half, all these sketches. And I would literally think, I've got to write that sketch by 1 o'clock, write that sketch by 3 o'clock, write that sketch by 5 o'clock, write that sketch by so-and-so. So we do that Monday, Tuesday.
Can I interrupt you just for a minute there? Only because with the audience, we just think you guys must be having a laugh a minute because it's all so funny and we're on the receiving end of that humour. But isn't that quite stressful?
Yeah, it is. You've just got to do it. It's like when you're doing Strictly, you've got to dance your way out. We had to write our way out. But we enjoyed it. It's what we did. But yes, it was under that pressure, and you need the pressure of deadlines. I mean, I think Stephen Fry said he loved the sound that the deadlines make as they whoosh by. So we wrote on Monday, Tuesday. My script editor would come in, John Langdon, brilliant, and he would tweak the scripts. Literally on that Monday morning, the whole crew, the makeup, the location people, the director were waiting in the room next door with croissants and coffee to be told what they needed to do, which wigs we needed, which costumes we needed, which locations. So we'd write Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday, we go off to somewhere like Rootham on the edge of the M25, where they had lots of rooms. So the staircase could be the White House. A drawing room could be Buckingham Palace.
Yeah.
An office would be Tony Blair's office, where he talked with Alistair Campbell. So we had a choice of different locations just out of town, and we'd film all day there, come back in. The next day, Thursday, the show on Saturday. The next day on Thursday, we go into a studio in West London. So we could do the sort of little studio pieces like the green screen with a weather map behind it or anything like that. Or we were very lucky, people like Jon Snow or Kirsty Young or Kirsty Walk or Krishnan and Gurren Murthy would come in and interview me as Tony Blair or as William Hague or as whoever. And so we did those sketches on a Thursday, stopped halfway through Thursday. I would then just decompress for an afternoon or an evening. That's Thursday. And then Friday, I go to the studio in Wembley or Teddington and I'd write the monologues all day for the monologues, the pieces in between.
Yes.
Meanwhile, the whole show was being edited together. And come that Friday night, we'd go in front of the audience. I'd do my monologues. We'd play in the
And that was a live audience, wasn't it? I saw.
Yep. Played in the recordings in the film. And so we got the audience reaction and the laughing because we didn't use a lot of canned laughter. And those were best. And then John Bird and John Fortune did their wonderful peerless pieces that I just would stand at the side of the stage just in awe watching them do their stuff. Then it was all ready on Friday and then they'd edit it all day Saturday. It would go out Saturday night or Sunday. And then we'd start again on Monday. It was adrenaline. It was great. It was a really exciting time. And I was incredibly privileged to have that for the best part of 20 years, really.
Yeah.
That's the story of Bremner, Bird and Fortune.
As I say, I watched it. It was as if you had done it yesterday. It was so fresh. Okay, different question, which is, you identify as someone that you are going to impersonate, whether it's Donald Trump or whatever. What is your process from going from identifying them to nailing them?
Well, it depends if there's somebody who's in my repertoire and who's sort of locked and loaded in a way. Something I've been doing for a while, like Tony Blair or William Hague or whatever. If it was a new character, after the Panorama interview, Jeff came in and I was thinking, I know he's going to say, you're going to do Diana this week. And of course, yeah. So we better do Diana. So I had to do the Diana wig and the puppy dog eyes and we had to sort of rewrite the sketch. I would listen to tapes because you've got to sort of forget what people are saying and just listen to how they're saying it. You pick up on the accent, whether it is a Yorkshire accent, whether it's a deep voice like Roger Moore. I said, well, no, I wouldn't say I was a wooden actor, but on hot days I was a fire risk. And that's a deep voice. And for deep ones, you have to really hyperventilate. So you can force your voice down there. And then there were some breathy voices like Ian McCaskill or Russell Grant, and these different voices. So you have to sort of work out where it's coming from and have they got an accent. And often what helped was sometimes I did new characters in makeup and I would always have a big screen in front of me, which would, of course, show me what I was doing, what I looked like in makeup in the set. And so all I had to do was provide the voice in a sense. So all the context was there and it was tricking my brain in a way. So I thought, oh gosh, what you as an impressionist, what you're doing at its peak is you are, in your mind's eye, you're watching a film of that person and you're providing the soundtrack. Okay.
So I was able to visualizing it.
You're sort of visualizing. You think, I wonder what when it becomes totally if you're doing Donald Trump. Kate, I would be sitting here. And the way that he moves his head and, and he puts his hands backwards and forwards like an accordion, the body language and all the rest of it. But if you saw yourself in that set, then it really did help to trick your brain. And also so many different elements helped the impression that if I did an impression of somebody, which was my trademark when I was doing the monologue pieces. But if I was doing a voice just for the first time, people might think, oh, I'm not quite sure that that's on it. But if you've got the costume is right, the makeup is right, the set is right, it's enough to get you over the line.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. So, yeah, I mean, there's some voices like Noel Edmonds came up for Deal or No Deal. And I thought I never could do Noel Edmonds. And then I listened and I realised that with Noel Edmonds, there's a little crackle in the voice. Oh, it's the banker. 50,000.
Oh my God, that is him.
50,000 pounds. £1,000. And that crackle in the voice. Thought, great, cracked it. So in we go. And it was lovely because the crew became the audience. I talked a lot about luck, but in a way, I was just channeling people. It was like I was possessed, really. You are a conduit and this stuff is coming through you.
So when you're actually performing, it sounds like you're almost like an out-of-body experience. And beforehand, do you get nervous?
Yeah, I get nervous now. I mean, I was doing a show last night in Liverpool and I just get myself into that state because I want it to be really good. Depending on where I am in the audience, I've thought about it before. They've given me a briefing call. So let's say if it's something about, I don't know, local councils. If I was doing a local council, they have this thing about a statutory override, which is where they've run out of money and they think, where are we going to find it from? And they've got a thing called a statutory override, which is like a sort of down the back of the sofa. That's where councils can get an extra piece of money that they need it. And they also have the CFO of the council has a thing called a Section 5 order that he can put on, which basically says, do not spend any more money. So I would go and I would speak to them. And my beginning of a speech would say, I don't know how you can afford me. I think it must have come out of the statutory override. And then I said, oh yeah, I've got all the lingo now. In fact, I've issued my children with the Section 5 order this morning. And outside the room, that would mean nothing. But inside the room, they go, oh, you're speaking our language. You know, and you've done your homework. And you put that bit in. Also, what's topical. That has always been my bread and butter, my inspiration. What's happening and how can I turn it? And in a way, when you're writing jokes, there's a true line and there's a funny line. And if you can get those two close together. So for example, when I was doing David Cameron, there's always this thing. I mean, when I started out, people said, are you going to make the rich richer? Are you going to make the poor poorer? And I think we managed to do both. That works as Cameron's voice. It works as a funny line, but also people go, oh, there's a truth behind that. Because one of the things about that coalition and that government was the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. I'm sure, there's statistics and stuff which would technically dispute that, but actually that is the overwhelming feeling of the last 10 years, which I characterize anyway as ABC, which is austerity, Brexit, and the C is either COVID or Boris Johnson, depending on your point of view. Because many people consider that I'm a considerable C. But anyway, that's what happened. So it's all about making sense of something and then making nonsense of it. That's how it works. So I'd have to try and make sense of stuff. And we spent a lot of time, trying to work out the politics, trying to work out how things are going and researching it. And we had great researchers. And then you had to make it funny and you had to make it pointed and in a way that you'd hold it up to the audience and say, well, look at it from this angle. Is this not ridiculous? And sometimes the truth would be even more ridiculous. With John Bird and John Fortune, they found out that not only did we sell Saddam Hussein tanks, British military equipment, but we lent him the money to buy it with in something called the Export Credit Guarantee Scheme.
Did we?
And John Bird thought, well, this is ridiculous. And so he rang up a friend of his who worked for the Ministry of Defence or something and said, is this true that not only did we sell Saddam tanks, but we lent him the money? And this contact said, oh, yeah, it's just part of the fog of hypocrisy that surrounds this place. And then once I did hoax calls as John Major, and we fooled an MP, but it turned out that MP was a backbencher who was organising a rebellion against John Major the following week. But because he'd had this call from John Major, which actually was me,
was you.
He called the whole thing off. Then when the alarm bells went across Westminster, Whitehall, they thought, who are these people? They say they've had a call from John Major. So they traced it back to us. And then they had to go to the MP and say, well, that wasn't John Major. We had no idea that this MP that we were hoaxing was organising a rebellion, which he cancelled because he'd spoken to John Major. So truth is stranger than fiction. It happened again later on election day when I rang up. I was being Gordon Brown and I was ringing up members of the Liberal cabinet. I rang up Prescott, but he didn't pick up. And then we had Margaret Beckett and she picked up. So, hi, Margaret, it's Gordon here. Oh, Gordon, lovely to speak to you. So we had a conversation. We need to know about who we could think about putting into the cabinet. And, maybe we could. And we had this chat about who was going to be in the cabinet and ended the call very cordially. And I could look up and see the lawyers were sort of going, that's not going to go out. So that sat in the desk somewhere for a while and then gave the story to somebody.
Didn't you pretend to be Nelson Mandela once?
Yes, that was Roger Taylor. Well, Roger Taylor, we did a version of Bohemian Rhapsody. I was doing The Queen as opposed to Queen. And it was, around about the time of the whole Diana stuff and Camilla. It was, is this the royal life or just publicity? On Panorama, on the TV with Dimbleby. And it's no surprise the blame is all Di's, you see. And of course, later on, they had these great lines like, Camilla, no, she will not let him go. Let him go. You know, oh, lady die, lady die, lady die. And,
oh my gosh, I'm going to have to look it up.
It's there on YouTube. If you look up Rory Bremner, Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's there. And we couldn't clear it, again, regulations, because the music publisher said, no, you can't. But I happened to know Roger Taylor through a friend, and so rang him up and said, would you clear this? He said, oh, yeah, fine, absolutely, we can do it, yeah. In fact, not only that, but he came in when we were recording at a studio in Soho, and he played the drums on our version of it, which is great.
That's so
awesome. To this day, the sight of him with his headphones playing drums on a little sketch for us, it's great. Anyway, so his reward was when he went to South Africa to do the Nelson Mandela concert. For Mandela, we rang him up a day or two before. Ed Hutley, who's a friend of mine, he's got his number and said, Mr. Taylor, we've got a telephone call from the president. Oh, put it through.
Is that the great Roger Taylor?
Oh, yes, hello.
I would like to have some requests.
And he started to ask him to play these ridiculous songs.
Do you know anything by Kaja Gugu? I like that song by Black Lace. I go do, push a monkey, climb a tree.
And eventually, and my favorite, I want to break free. So we got all these ridiculous songs, and he was getting more and more sort of, well, I think we can do that one, sir, and all the rest of it. And then we sort of hung up and rang back a few minutes later and said, did you just get a call from Nelson Mandela? Yes, I did actually. Oh, I'm afraid you didn't.
No,
I'm so sorry.
You didn't.
So that was it. I mean, it's just so childish, really, isn't it?
That's fantastic. That's hilarious. Anthony St. John, your dear friend.
Anthony St. John, Lord St. John of Bledsoe.
He had a question for you.
He had a question.
He certainly did. And I'm not going to be able to do it. You come from Scotland, you were educated at Wellington, you were picked up as an incredible talent and found fame and glory at the Edinburgh Fringe. Your sketches are internationally acclaimed.
Somebody's been on Wikipedia.
You devote a lot of time to good causes, e.g. Tusk Trust, and I know that is a good cause that you would do with Anthony. He's also part of that. You are a force for good. You're a family man. How do you balance career, family, charitable works?
Very badly.
Okay.
Is the answer to that question. Because, I mean, as comedians, we live in our head, writing and observing, consciously or subconsciously. And there's always another show to do, another routine to do, another sketch to do. So, there is that element. And of course, as performers, that's what we do. We're at our most fulfilled when we're performing. And that's not always the optimum for the people that we live with. But of course, the great thing, our children are great levelers. And my writer, John Langdon, would say, yes, so's a steamroller. But children are levelers in which they weren't, through their childhood when they were too young to know. I mean, they weren't particularly impressed at whether I could do a really good impression of Bruce Forsyth or not. But then later on, actually, I'm very pleased. I really wanted that time as a dad when your children would suddenly go, oh, I get, Dad can teach me some things here. Because they always just seem to, I think, well, yes, Dad, yeah, we're doing something else. We're more interested in this or we're doing this. In the last year or two, the children have come to see the shows. And my 22-year-old, Lila, and she went to see a show in Richmond. And I think I missed it, actually, but somebody told me it was just on her Instagram story. And she just put a picture of me and put GOAT, as in, greatest of all time. And that means the world to me.
But it's hard because everyone's going to want you to be on their charity.
Yeah.
So you're being pulled in lots of directions.
My big problem is I'm a people pleaser. And actually that is as much, just as the ADHD is my best friend and my worst enemy, being a people pleaser is so much part of me. It is so important to make people happy. But the trouble is that you lose your ability to say no. You kind of question your own judgment, your presumption, instead of, look, really, have you got time to do this? Or are you not taking on too much? Is, oh, well, I can do it. One of the mantras that I live by is make the effort. It's a rod for my own back because I want to make a difference, make people happy if I can. I want to make the effort. And so, I've always found it very hard to say no. And that's a problem.
It's lovely for everyone else, but that's tough on you.
I think the children like the fact that the dad is a comedian. I suppose I don't know if I was prime minister or chancellor or whatever, particularly with the politicians and the scandals and the trouble and the stress that they're under. That's a different thing. But if you're a comedian who, by and large, because you're in comedy and entertainment, people enjoy what you do, it's a nice thing. I just hope that when the final script is written, I'll come out of it as a reasonable dad.
I think the fact that you even think that means that I'm sure you will, because most people don't even think about it. They're just kind of doing their thing and not worrying about anyone else. But you've done so much. I mean, I'm just going to mention a few things here, which is even guesting on Have I Got News for You, Whose Line Is It Anyway, The Imitation Game, where you were team captain. You've done countless live shows. You've created and presented radio shows, presented documentaries. You've written for
I'm feeling tired now.
I know. I was reading about this. You've written for major newspapers and magazines. You've translated 4 operas from French and German to English. Where did that fit in?
Okay. Well, I think a long time ago when I was at university, so I went to King's, which
Yes.
I think we talked about earlier.
Yes, we
so
did.
I was able to do
And
lectures
Derek
in the
Swift.
day. And Derek Swift, of course, was a Russian teacher and French teacher. So I went to King's, I did French and German. And when I was doing that, I thought, it'd be quite fun to do a translation one day. And then the thought went away from my head and came back 15, 20 years later when there was a Jonathan Miller series about opera. And there was a conductor on it who was very flamboyant and quite maverick in a sort of pink blouse, almost shirt. And he's a genius. His name's Charles Hazelwood. He's just a wonderful, wonderful, brilliant conductor. Brilliant, wonderful man. I was reviewing the show on the radio and I said, when they had this guy who was pouncing around in a pink shirt and his mother was listening to it. And in the way that mothers do, edited out the bad bit and just said, Rory was talking about you on the radio. And he had a project coming up at the Wilton's Music Hall. It's amazing, amazing music hall in the East End of London, just near Tower Bridge, which hadn't been used for 140 years. It had been variously a warehouse, a goat brothel, as somebody said once, and various other things. But in Victorian times, it had been 500 candle chandelier, and people would come in and there'd be this variety bills. You know, if you ever remember the good old days, there would be people singing, a bit like in Oliver, down at the old Bull and Bush, all that. And the sailors would come in, being the East End. Boats would have come in from all over the world and they would pile in. And opera singers used to come from Covent Garden. They would jump into a hansom cab and clip-clop across London to be on this big variety bill in this huge pub in Victorian times. And it had lain unused. Anyway, so that had a fantastic story to it. But they were doing an opera by Kurt Weill, who worked with Bertolt Brecht, later called The Silver Lake, Der Silbersee. And because I'd been talking about opera on the radio and had got to the conductor. He said, well, let's ask him if he'd be interested in doing the translation. And I jumped at it. I thought, this is great. This is what I've always wanted to do. And so that got me sitting down and you've got the score, all the music, all the notes on one side. You've got the CD, so you could play it again and again and again. And I could read music very vaguely. I lost the ability. I did grade 1 in piano. And then after that, I started just copying the teacher or playing it by ear.
Yes.
So I lost the ability to read, but I could very slowly read the music. So I'd have the score there. I'd have the original. I didn't want any other translations because I didn't want that in my head because my translation had to be original. So yeah, score, the CD, a rhyming dictionary, which I always thought was cheating, but actually it's very, very helpful. And off I went and we did it. And it was so exciting and a wonderful young cast. And I was absolutely hooked. It was so absorbing. It was like solving a crossword puzzle or something. But it was only an extension. I used to do so many songs in Bremner, Bird and Fortune. You know, you did a song about Jerry Adams doing it. And it was like about the Troubles. It's right, said me, time stop the violence, call us ceasefire. That's the way to go. Face the fact, make need another tactic. We was getting nowhere. And so we changed the policy. And Major had to think. And he said, we ought to seek clarification on the Downing Street Declaration. But it did no good. Sure, never thought it would. All right, said John. Time to scrap the weapons. Those there weapons are going to have to go. We went barmy, can't control the army. Back to bombs and violence they goes. So John asked me what the future now will be, and I say, knows. So I can remember them.
That's better than the original song.
Well, the reason I do that is because I loved rewriting songs. I loved getting the lyrics right, playing with those, getting this. And I love playing with words and lyrics, and songs is the ultimate way to do it. So, you know, I did a Jacob Rees-Mogg about, these are the countries in Europe I can't stand. And it was a version of the Elements song, Tom Lehrer. There's cesium and barium and sodium.
Oh, yes.
Except this was about all the countries in Europe. So it was Portugal and Italy and Poland and Romania, the Netherlands and Germany and France, Lithuania, Sweden, Spain and Hungary and Finland and Estonia, Slovenia, Slovakia and maybe Macedonia. And the last line was,
you remember all of this?
Yeah. It was after Brexit. So they tried to stop us leaving, which is perfectly absurd of them. It's what the British public voted for, at least a third of them. So if you go right back to the beginning when we started talking, I was talking about what were the records we were playing as children. It was Flanders and Swan. It was Dame Edna. It was Gilbert and Sullivan. And so that went in very deep. That was my love of songs, and the changing around songs and translation was just another development for that. So we did the German one first. Then we did Carmen, which is French, obviously, although somebody else said Carmen by Bizet is as Spanish as the Champs-Élysées. So that we put into English, and they did it in South Africa. And then there was another one for Scottish opera, which was Orpheus in the Underworld. and Seven Deadly Sins, which is still sitting on the shelf because Charles was going to do it. It was either COVID or something else, so they cancelled the festival. So I've got this script of Seven Deadly Sins, but I loved it. I don't know if I'd have time to do it now, but it was a natural extension of enjoying playing with words and putting them to music and making them work.
Peter Morgan wrote The Audience. It's a play
Yes.
and then turned into a film, and it's about the Queen and all her different prime ministers. And I think the feeling was that she had a particular fondness for Harold Wilson. So I was wondering, having spent all this time with all these different politicians and characters, was there one that you have a particular fondness of?
There are a few. I suppose I was quite fond of John Major, in a sense. It's funny, but looking back, this is where we've got to now. You look back and you see John Major as a statesman, and Gordon Brown particularly as a man of great intelligence and integrity. Tony Blair served me well for about 10 years. It was always Blair, Bird and Fortune, never known Bremner, Bird and Fortune. I actually started, I think there was a period in the 90s or beginning 2000s when I actually sounded like him. I'd find myself falling into his vocal tics, as it were.
Did he invite you for tennis or something? In the hope that you weren't going to take him
that
on?
was bizarre. Yeah, that was 96. So the year before they came to power, I was in south of France. I was on a holiday. And I was in a bar and a French guy said to me, he said, "Oh, you're Prime Minister." No, it wasn't Prime Minister. He said, "You're socialist leader." Socialist? Your Labour leader is coming down here next week. And so I rang our office and said, "It's Tony Blair on holiday in the south of France." And I don't know what happened. But anyway, the next thing I know, in the villa there I was staying, the phone rang and it was Cherie Blair. And she was saying, "Would you like to go and play tennis with Tony?" So, yeah, so I thought, gosh, it'd be interesting. Because although you like to keep your distance from politicians, John Fortune once said, he said, "Well, nobody ever accused David Attenborough of getting too close to the animals." So this was research. So we ended up playing tennis. I mean, it was a bizarre game of tennis. Later on, the following week, it was me and Tony Blair playing against Dave Smith of the Eurythmics and Brian Ferry. So it's bizarre. Anyway, so he came over and had a barbecue and he said, "Look, my kids do impressions of you doing impressions of me." And I said, "Oh, God." So I listened to that. And I said, "Well, if you become Prime Minister next year, the boot will be on the other foot. And I'll be doing you." And he said, "Gosh, golly, so how does Lord Bremner sound?" So I could have been joining Lord Anthony Syndron in the House of Lords, but that never came about.
Well, I guess you did take him off very well, so maybe that was why.
I did get a letter about offering an OBE. That was just after the Iraq shows that we'd done. And I thought, I can't possibly, this is crazy. We've been doing satirical shows where we've been critical of the government and we've been sending them up and we've been questioning their policy. And, to end that period of my life by going, "Do you know what? Yeah, actually, cool. Yeah, all right, Tony. I know you took it as a joke." And I thought that was wrong.
Did you ever have, and I don't even know what the word is, an impersonatee who took umbrage, who was upset with you?
Not enough is the answer to that question. David Cameron, he said, "I don't think you can do a very good. I don't think your impression of me, I don't think it's very good. I don't think you can do me." So I thought, well, there's a challenge. And his wife was about 20 feet away talking to some people. She had her back to us. So I said to Cameron, because I said, "Tell me something about you that only your wife would know." He said, "Well, I do have rather a bad back." So I went up behind her with her back to me and I said, "Darling, can we go now? My back's giving me so much jip." And without looking around, she said, "Oh, David, for goodness sake." And then she turned around and I was standing there. And so that was kind of
So he had to eat his words.
I wanted to walk back to him. "What did you do when he resigned?" And he turned around and went back into Downing Street going, "Do, do, 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 do." So that was kind of going through my head as I went back to him and just the look on his face. Well, maybe it's better than I thought.
A most hilarious moment on or off stage?
Whoa. Oh, well, I think probably the last sort of examples of that. I was so lucky to have the time that I did with Bird and Fortune because they were so good at what they did. And yeah.
How did you guys not laugh? Because it's one thing standing up on your own and you just have to do it. But having watched actually more really the two of them talking to each other, I think, how did they not just collapse?
Well, sometimes they did. And John Bird pretended to be annoyed that they'd broken the spell in a way by sort of like, but actually, do you know what? Thinking about it, there's something about being playful, which was a lesson I learned late in life when I was doing a show and when another comedian on the bill, or support act, was a guy called Silky White, he's known as, and he teaches comedy, teaches stand-up. And I was driving him back from Bangor along the North Wales Expressway, and I said, "Oh, would you give me some notes?" And he said, "Yeah, I think you should be a bit more playful." And from that moment, my relationship with the audience changed because instead of being almost a little bit wary of them, almost a little bit, and the audience provided that noise, as I said earlier, and laughter, I started to kind of just enjoy it a little bit more, which previously I thought, rather like John Bird, thought that you shouldn't look as though you're enjoying your own comedy that makes you look smug. It's not that at all. It's actually enjoying the moment. So I think there is an element that if the audience senses that you are playing and that this is material which you are offering because this comes from your sense of humour, then there'll be a connection. And with John Bird and John Fortune, there were those moments when they would accidentally corpse. But the audience just loved that.
Yeah.
My version of that was when I was doing the monologues. We start at the beginning, obviously. Very good place to start. As Julie Andrews said, I would do the first of all, it was so last minute that go on the auto cue at the very, very last minute. So I'd read it again in front of the audience, but I didn't want to read what was up there because I didn't want to give the jokes away. So let's say it was Mandela and then Clinton and then Tony Blair. So I just quickly speed read it and go, and the audience would kind of recognise who I was going to be. And then I'd go into it to do it the first time, but I would stop halfway through the first joke, deliberately cock it up. Instead of the audience sitting back with crossed arms going, okay, well, we are going to watch a show, they were aware that everything that we were doing was in real time and we needed their support.
Yes.
We needed them on our side.
I hadn't really thought about it, but yes.
When you cocked up or whatever, probably because I really did cock up before, that I realised that I sensed that the audience were going, oh, well, we must help him here. And that extra little element of the audience actually going, we'll get you through this. And they laugh more and they are on your side. And I think that's the lovely thing to do. Bird and Fortune, as I say, I mean, they were peerless, just so funny. There's nobody of that calibre, of that class that I can think of working today.
For young people today thinking that they want to become comedians, is there any advice?
I always say the answer to that question is when people say, my son is an impressionist, can you give him any advice? I always say, tell him to read the Bible. And they say, why is that? And I say, well, it won't stop him, but it'll slow him down for a few years. Because I don't need the competition, quite frankly. But no, I mean, seriously, I don't know quite how it works now. I was lucky because, as I said, lucky, the cabaret circuit was just beginning in the early 80s. I have no idea now. Well, I do, actually. But I don't even know if Time Out or City Limits is still the magazine. So people could see where comedy clubs are going on, where comedy clubs have an open mic thing. So if you think you're a comedian, if you've got some stuff or an impressionist or whatever, you work up a little sort of 4 or 5 minute routine and then you say to the people, have you got an open mic night? I'd love to try stuff out. But the bills that I've been on recently and really been enjoying, it's those kind of things where maybe you have 2 or 3 or 4 stand-ups and a bill. And some of those nights will have an open mic spot where people can come and try stuff out. And there are comedy clubs. There are a lot of those around. So that's a way to start. Local radio is often a way to start, doing jingles or doing voiceovers or that sort of thing. But I would say probably you've got to get your stuff together and you really should be talking to the people I've been doing the shows with. And I was asking this question as well, how they got started. Because, listen, I'm talking about 1983. We're talking 40 years ago. It's terrifying.
At the very start, we talked about ADHD. You are patron of the UK ADHD Partnership. Please enlighten us.
ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is not a disorder, it's a difference. And there are different people and they will have different strengths. And I think we're coming to understand that now. And tech companies are actually now increasingly recruiting people who are on that spectrum, who are neurodiverse. People who are dyslexic have a phenomenal ability at problem solving and seeing patterns. I did a talk at MI6 the other day, and there were people who will be all sorts of neurodiverse.
Yes.
Different brains. That's the paradigm that we've got to shift from thinking that people with ADHD are a problem to thinking that actually they are a potential asset. The D, the attention deficit. It's not that you're not paying attention. It's that you're paying attention to too many.
Lots of things.
And I'm sure it is difficult as a teacher, but somehow or other, these brains are super active. Let's not say hyperactive. Unfortunately, we're in a very ADHD world in a sense because this mobile phone I have in my pocket, I mean, it's monetized on distraction, isn't it?
Yes,
the whole
it
purpose.
is.
And there are so many things grabbing at our attention all the time that does play into the fact that a lot of children now, they do struggle. They say, oh, God, they just get some resilience. But they're living in a society where everything is a demand on their time and on their attention. The propensity to be distracted and to get anxious. I think something like 40% of school children now meet the criteria for anxiety disorder. People, oh, don't be ridiculous, but it's worrying.
It is worrying. I looked at some statistics the other day and it was that 1 in 9 children have ADHD.
No, I think it's 1 in 20 for
1 in 20.
1 in 20 for ADHD, but 1 in 10 are supposedly dyslexic. A lot of business leaders or entrepreneurs have ADHD or dyslexia or both. It's disproportionate. They turn out to be remarkably successful, maybe good with figures, maybe good with patterns. A lot of comedians have, because it's what makes us different. And part of it is that, well, there's two ways of looking at ADHD. There's a sort of chemical thing, which is that we've got, if you imagine that our brains are an engine, and we need the oil, fuel that's running around the engine, that's dopamine in our brains. If you have ADHD, you're not regulating dopamine properly. And that's why this extraordinary professor, doctor, psychiatrist called Brinkley, I think it's Charles Brinkley, in the 1950s, I think. And he had a lot of his pupils at an institute where he worked. They struggled, with a lot of ADHD, and he thought, what do I do? And so he gave them speed. That's counterintuitive. And that's what Ritalin essentially is. It's methylphenidate, which is speed. And it was really counterintuitive. Think, why are you going to give these hyperactive children something? But it didn't. What it meant was the drug speed would do what their hyperactivity would do, because all they were trying to do was to rev themselves up to get the dopamine flowing. That's the sort of chemical.
So we would do it for them, which meant that they could calm down.
That's my understanding of it, yeah.
Okay.
That's the chemical side of it, if you like. But the other side of it, if you look at sort of brain scans and things, people with ADHD, they tend to have, if you look at an ADHD brain and let's say a neurotypical brain, at say 9, the 9-year-old will have it look like the map of the world, and most countries will be in almost like the old empire. It'll be bits painted in pink, but most of the pieces will be sort of by and large there. But if you look at a 9-year-old ADHD brain, it's like half the pieces are missing. And those are the networks in the brain. This is why it's a neurodevelopmental condition, because there are parts of the brain, the networks haven't been fully formed yet. And one of those is the part that controls impulsivity. So in fact, the part of your brain that stops you from being impulsive, it's not properly developed. With comedians, of course, that means you haven't got a filter. And so it's almost like, well, Tourette's, of course, as she's been in the news recently.
Yes.
Tourette's is on that neurodiverse spectrum. And again, it's at some level, that filter is gone. So bang. And they come out with the most inappropriate thing, as has happened recently.
Yes.
That's a variation on this. There's something in the brain which normally would, or neurotypically, let's say, would kind of stop you. Doesn't in the case of somebody with ADHD because it's not there. But in a comedian, that means speed of thought. That means you get to the joke faster, or you say something which is outrageous. And very often things that are outrageous are funny because they break the normal.
For school children, you have the medical side of things. And I know that a friend of my daughter's, she said it was amazing. She uses it all the time, Ritalin. But what she found was she was able to then think, oh, this is how other people's brains have quietened down, and now I can focus. And because you don't know that your brain's any different from anyone else's, because you just know what's happening to you, and that's normal for you.
Somebody said it's like you can tell a playful Labrador to go and sit down in the corner while you're dealing with something else. It helps you in a sense to prioritize. I don't take meds myself, but I've heard from people who, because it does have an effect instantly. In the case of methylphenidate, it's not like an antidepressant that you have to get on for a few weeks to get on it and get off it. The effect can be instant. People say it's like putting on a pair of glasses and it just changes your focus. For me, it actually slowed me down. I tried it once when I was doing a show for a documentary.
Yes, I remember. I tried to find it and I couldn't get it, actually.
But it slowed me down. But interesting, why it's in the news now, people say, oh, all these people are being diagnosed with ADHD. If it is 1 in 20, we have a population of around 60 million. There will be 3 million people with ADHD. So in a sense, it's not overdiagnosis, it's diagnosis. And we're understanding that there are people who have that condition, I won't call it a disorder, who are different. And sometimes that condition, it makes it hard if you're impulsive or impetuous or irrepressible, or your brain is racing, you have this creative, restless energy. And sometimes it can be impairing. It's difficult to hold down a job, difficult to sustain a relationship. And that's when you might start to need a little bit of help. But this idea that, everyone's on Ritalin, why are these people on Ritalin? You don't get people saying, all these people wearing glasses. Why do these people are they wearing glasses just to look cool? Like saying they've got ADHD because it's cool. No, they've just found a way of seeing more clearly in the case of glasses. And with ADHD, they thought, right, I get that's kind of why I'm like I am now. Now I need to deal with it. You don't say to other people, right, I've got ADHD, you deal with it. If you have ADHD and you get a diagnosis, think, right, okay, it's almost like passing your driving test. You go, okay, right, now I'm in control of this. I can start to sort of have coping strategies. So if I say there are supposedly 3 million people would have ADHD, currently I reckon it's gone up a lot recently with more publicity and more people knowing about it. I think it's currently running between about 250, 300,000 people in Britain are on ADHD medication, about 300,000. And do you know how many are on antidepressants?
Oh, a lot more than that.
About 8 or 9 million.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that big, yeah. And I'm sure a lot of these people who are on antidepressants, actually, it may very well be ADHD or that kind of neurodiverse. So it is a thing. And it's a worry because, as I said, social media and media in general is so ubiquitous and distracting and monetized on distracting you. And everything is polarized and everything is urgent and everything is so much more hypercharged as well. I mean, if you go from calm on the one hand to angry on the other, there used to be several stops on the way.
No, there isn't. It's 0 to 100.
Yeah, the beaching cuts, took down railway stations. Now, between calm and anger, one of my daughters, she says, I'm really angry. And I go, are you? Or are you just disappointed or frustrated or just a bit pissed off or this? There's all these stops, but we now go straight. And politicians do this all the time. I'm really angry about this. You think, well, can you not say, I'm really concerned about this, or I'm really frustrated by this? But anger becomes the go-to response. And we see this in politicians and we see this in Trump and others. And a lot of people follow it because you think that the extreme is the way to behave. And we're brought up on things like The Apprentice, where it's all about you're fired. And it's quite an aggressive world, which plays into, I think, this thing where it's quite unkind in many ways. My mission, purpose to some extent, is to build understanding and say that if we reckon that 25% of the prison population is diagnosed with ADHD, 25% of youth offenders, people who are in youth offenders institutions, they are diagnosed with ADHD. Now, if we were to flip that, and instead of being the problem children, they became seen as these are potentially creatives, if we can handle these in the right way, that's the way through. Because remember, when you and I were young people, if you were left-handed, they'd tie your hand to the chair.
Yeah.
We're seeing a sort of an equivalent there of a paradigm of education where it's sit still and listen and all the rest of it. And maybe that paradigm doesn't suit neurodiverse brains. And if
Certainly
you find
not.
a way that does, then the reward will be children who grow into adults whose restless creativity or creative restlessness is a great asset and not a liability. That would be so exciting. And also the cost of untreated and undiagnosed ADHD over a lifetime is worked out something like £1.2 million in terms of with the criminal justice system. And I mean, this is obviously averages across, but it would cost somebody with untreated and undiagnosed as an average about 1.2 million. But if they were diagnosed and had treatment, whether it's meds or other thing, then that can be in the tens of thousands, so like, I think it's 18,000 or something like that. So you've got 18,000 against 1.2 million. But just as immigration needs to have a multi-agency, massive conference to come around and understand that there are different elements of immigration, whether you've got the global south is migrating and you've got the northern Europe, which is aging population and needs to be looked at in the round. Similarly, this whole thing about neurodiversity, I think you need to have a look at it, which brings together the justice system and the health system and the education system and say, how can we make the most of these potentially really talented children without at the expense of others, just thinking, how is the best way to educate, which is that thing, how is the best way to bring out their potential?
Yeah, absolutely. And make them feel valued and not a waste of space.
We could be at war in 2 or 3 years' time because we've gone from this benign end of history idea that we have these institutions, after all, United Nations and NATO and the European Union, that by and large people cooperated and held that has been fracturing and is being undermined by certain people. I don't know who I've got in mind there, Katie, but there's 1 or 2 people who they kind of think, well, I'm not sure about NATO. I don't know about NATO. So people are very overwhelmed. So ADHD, it is a thing, and we just have to somehow find a way to turn that liability into an asset. And already tech companies are going out of their way to find people who are neurodiverse, what we used to call on the spectrum, because they think differently. And I think maybe that's who we need.
There was that fantastic quote from legendary filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola, who said, the things that they send you out of school for are the things that they give you awards for later in life. Just to finish off, I did have a quick chat with some of your friends, and Tim Wright, David Fitzsimmons, Anthony, as you know, and there are just a couple of comments that I'm just passing on to you, and I'm not going to attribute them to anyone in particular, but Rory always thinks the best of everyone. Even when he's not on show, Rory's always entertaining everyone. He's a superstar. He's a force for good. He really cares. He's a loyal friend. He's special. I just wanted to pass that on. So, Rory, thank you so much for talking to me today. And you've been so amazing and so generous with your time, which,
thank you.
And there you are with all the people pleasing. Cannot thank you enough.
That's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to all of the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.